Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to look at all the properties that make up an item in Path of Exile. Most players are familiar with the basics, but we are going to go through each property individually and figure out the impact it can have on the value of an item. Now, all this information I'm going to cover is fairly common. Most of it hasn't changed since Path of Exile came out, but it's still something that newer players are going to struggle with, and even veteran players can sometimes be unfamiliar with how these properties fit together and can make silly mistakes from time to time. It's a body of information that can be difficult to learn in full, but I find that the more you know, the less mistakes you make when you're trying to craft, and the fewer those feel bad moments you have when trading with someone. So to start off with, let's look at this pair of boots here. And if we mouse over it and hold down Alt, we're going to get a detailed look at all the stats here. And so if we look through, what we see is that this item isn't particularly good, but what's nice about it is it happens to have all the different properties that we're going to talk about in this video. From the top down, it has a name, Agony League. It has a base type, two-tone boots. It has quality and defensives. So here it has 10% quality and some armor and energy shield. It has an item level, 82. It has a required level and attribute requirements. It has in the light blue an enchantment, or on other pieces it might be called an anointment. Between those two thin lines, you can see we have an implicit modifier, fire and lightning resist, and then below that, the big chunk of our modifiers are called prefixes and suffixes listed there, and at the very bottom we have a spot where it will indicate whether or not the item is corrupted. So we're just going to start from the top and work our way down. So the first thing is the name of the item. Is the name important? In most cases, no. So if we look at any old white item, it doesn't even have a name, right? It's just the base type there, Crusader Plate. If we were to bump it up to a magic item, we're going to see that it says Crusader Plate of Corundum Skin. So what it does with a magic item is it simply takes the suffix or the prefix, or both, Athlete's Crusader Plate of Corundum Skin, and attaches them to the base name. Is this important? Usually not, although sometimes it can be helpful if you are, say, using alterations to try to look for a particular mod. It can be easier to look at the name and just keep your eye out for a particular prefix or suffix that you're looking for. Once we take an item and we bump it up to rare, however, so now this item is called Foe Ward, and that has absolutely zero significance at all. And every time you re-roll a rare, the name will change. So does the name matter? Typically not. Once you go up to a unique though, like for instance this Beacon of Madness or this Perfidy, the name is important. The name signifies what the item is. There's only one unique called Perfidy, and it's going to have this same set of stats regardless. So the next thing we want to look at is the base type. So in the case of our example item, we're talking about that line two-tone boots. So what does that do for the item? To look at this, let's look at two similar items, this Val Regalia here and this Widow Silk Robe. Now, not paying attention to the sockets, the two items are pretty comparable, right? They both have an energy shield of, well, the Widow Silk is 150, the Val Regalia is 163, and the required level and the required int are also pretty similar, but the Widow Silks are a little less stringent. So which one is better? Most people would say Val Regalia because it has the higher flat energy shield. If you're looking to craft a chess piece that has the most possible energy shield, you're never going to want to craft on anything but a Val Regalia. However, if you're trying to craft something and you're finding that you either, for some reason, want it to have a lower required level or lower required attributes, then you might want to pick a different base. So something that can be helpful with this is the wiki. So if you go to the armor, body armor page on wiki, or really any of the base types that you might be looking at, it'll give you the full rundown of all the different bases that can drop. And so if we go down to the energy shield ones here, we can see that each base is going to have a different level requirement, intelligence requirement, and a flat energy shield. And then there's also this column for stats, which we'll talk about when we see one. So as you can see, as they sort of go up in level, they also go up in intelligence requirement and in flat ES. And right there at the top, we can see that Val Regalia has the highest flat ES. But down here at Occultist Vestment, we have an implicit. So we haven't got to implicits yet, but the base type can give your item an implicit. So looking back at our two-tone boots, that's the reason we have this fire and lightning resist as an implicit modifier, is because it's two-tone boots. Something like a Val Regalia doesn't have an implicit, whereas maybe another chest piece, like this Astral Plate, does. It has some flat resist as one of its implicits. The last thing to consider when it comes to base types is that they affect the type of socket that will roll when you try to recolor them. So in this case, we have a chess piece that is just intelligence based, which means if I try to recolor this, it's going to prefer blue, right? And you can see as I go, it's going to hit mostly blue sockets all the time. Whereas something like this ornate ringmail, which requires armor and energy shield, armor is going to force red sockets to come up more often, in addition to the blue from the energy shield. So as we roll, we should probably see an even split of reds and blues, while also seeing maybe a green from time to time. And so why is this important? So one of the big mistakes I see people make is they go and they buy a chess piece or a weapon for their build, and it's already got a bunch of sockets on it, it's already linked, and they think, oh great, all I need to do is recolor it. So if you need 6 blue sockets, you're going to have an easy time with this Widow Silk robe, right? I think I can hit, there we go. I just hit 6 blue sockets in 4 chromes. If I needed 6 blue sockets on this ornate ringmail, it might take me all day. It's not terribly unlikely. There it hit 6 red, so it can definitely hit 6 blue with the same amount of consistency. But I'm probably not going to hit it here. But if on either of these you needed 3 or 4 or 5 green sockets, you're pretty much out of luck. It's going to cost a lot of chromes and a lot of luck, or you're going to have to pay a pretty steep price in order to recolor those to the correct color. The next thing we want to talk about is quality. And quality doesn't do a lot to bases, but in the case of, say, this Widow Silk robe, which has no quality and has 150 ES, when we hit it with an armor scrap, you can see the ES jumps. So for any armor piece, the defensives are going to increase with quality, and when it comes to weapons, the flat physical damage on the base is going to increase with quality. So those are two of the places where quality is very important. For a lot of other items, like armor bases or evasion bases, if you don't really care about that defensive, then you don't care too much about the quality. But there's no reason not to get it if you have the armor scraps laying around. Another thing to consider with quality is that on a white item like this, you can see that the quality is going to jump by 5 every time I use one of these items, as opposed to on, say, a unique, where the quality will only jump by 1. So when you're crafting, if you can, you're better served qualitying up your base when it's white, as opposed to waiting until later when you're going to have to use a full stack. This is particularly painful with maps when you want to chisel something up to 20%. You definitely don't want to spend 20 chisels on a rare, you'd rather spend 4 on a white and then alch it. The most important thing about quality, though, which some people don't know and it tends to really screw them, is that it affects the chance that you 6 socket or 6 link a piece. So for instance, this chess piece right here, let's say we wanted to 6 link it, you might think, okay, it's already got 6 sockets, so I can just start jamming my fusings until I hit a 6 link. The problem with this is that for every percentage of quality, you increase the chance that you'll be able to 6-link it by 1%, which isn't a huge amount because of how low the probability is, but on average, it should save you close to 500 fusings to be able to 6-link something. So to 6-link this particular chest right here, I would anticipate using somewhere around 1500 fusings to get the 6-link. However, maybe this piece here, which has 20% on it, should take on average about 1,000. So if you league after league try to keep 6-linking items without quality, you are wasting multiple exalts worth of fusings every time you do this. The next thing we want to look at is item level. So if we take this Val Regalia here, we can see it has an item level 86. And this Val Regalia will always have item level 86. That can never change. So something to consider is that if you need a particular piece with a certain item level and it's not high enough, you need to go get a different base. There's no way to change this. There is no orb that can re-roll item level. But what is the significance of item level? Why do we care that this thing is 86? So 86 is pretty high. This one probably dropped out of a T15 or a T16 map. And what the item level will do is it'll limit what mods can roll on the base. So in order to figure this out, we are going to have to go out of the game and into PoEDB, which if you haven't used this before, it's a good free resource online that can just give you information about different mods. So I know it can be a little daunting, but if you follow along, I think it'll make a lot of sense. So we're looking for body armors and we're looking for intelligence bases. So if we click on that, what it'll do is it'll give us a list of prefixes on the left and suffixes on the right that can roll in our base. And our base doesn't have any influence, so we really only need to look at these mods right here. And for right now, what I'm really concerned with is this number here along the left. And these numbers are going to tell us the minimum item level we need to hit the best rolls possible in that class. So for instance, for a Val Regalia, we definitely might want to have a high percentage energy shield. And so if you click on that, it'll show you what the cutoffs are for particular rolls. If we want the best possible roll, we need an item level 86. It's not going to be good for us to craft on something that's, say, item level 83, because the most percentage we can roll is 91, and we would much rather have something like 101 to 110. Item level is particularly important when evaluating influence items. So if we go down to the influence mods, like the Shaper, Elder, and whatnot, we can see that there are certain mods that actually won't roll until you get to a certain item level. There aren't even tiers of it. Like for instance, right now, this Crusader mod, Enemies You Kill Explode, is quite popular, and it just has a cutoff at 85, which means an 84 chess piece could never roll this no matter how many times you tried, making an 85 chess piece worth quite a bit, probably a few chaos, while an 84 one might be completely worthless. And similar to that, if we look at Elder, there's a couple mods here that are quite popular. This percentage to max life and attacks have percentage to crit strike, 84 and 85. So what this means is that if we look at two chests, which on the surface seem pretty comparable, we have a Colosseum plate, item level 83 with Elder Influence, and an Astral plate with item level 85 with Elder Influence. Now, bases aside and the sockets aside, you might think, well, what is really the difference in value between these? Well, I can tell you that because this Colosseum plate is 83, it's complete trash. I'm probably going to throw it away as soon as I'm finished making this video. Whereas this Astral plate, being eye level 85, is probably worth a couple exalts. The next thing we want to look at is this light blue text here. So here we have adds 45 to 68 cold damage if you've been hit recently. This is a Labyrinth enchant. This item dropped with it already on it, but if you wanted to put this enchant on a pair of boots, you would have to run through the Labyrinth and use the Divine Font and hope that you hit the one that you want. It can be pretty tedious and involve a lot of RNG to get the exact one you want, but it is a way to make an item better. So you can enchant gloves, boots, and helm. The helm tends to be one of the most important ones. A lot of builds rely on having a good helm enchant. And the nice thing about enchants is that if you scour the item down, it will retain its enchant. So what that means is this particular Necromancer circlet is going to have frostbolt damage on it forever unless someone decides to enchant a new enchant over top of it. The other place where this text shows up is on amulets. So here you can see I have allocates Disciple of the Unyielding, and this is an anointment, and the way you would get these is by going to Cassia and putting in some random amulet, and if you throw in some oils, you will get some type of allocation. And what this does is it allocates a particular trait on your skill tree. And you hit anoint, and there we go. The next thing we want to look at is the implicit modifier. So we've already seen that two-tone boots have a particular implicit. If a two-tone boots drop, they are going to drop some combination of two resists as an implicit, and this mod right between those two lines will stay on the piece of gear as long as you have it. Again, similar to enchantments, you can scour it and you'll still have fire and lightning as your implicit. Some items don't have implicits, like this Val Regalia, and for no particular reason, some simply have them, some don't, and so you might want to prioritize items with a good implicit. So for instance, people like astral plates because they have built-in resists as an implicit. If an item doesn't have an implicit, it is possible for it to gain one through a corruption. So oftentimes, one of the risky ways to make a particular item better is to attempt to corrupt it. So for instance, this lore weave I have here has been double corrupted in the temple, and it has +1 to level of socketed gems and 4% max energy shield. I don't actually care too much about either of these, but it is strictly better than the lore weave before it was corrupted. Before it was corrupted, lore weave has no implicit, so this is a nice little boost. Another note about implicits, a lot of bases are quite valuable because of their implicit. So for instance, towards the end of the game, or actually pretty early on, you'll start seeing Stygian Vises, which this implicit has one abyssal socket, and abyssal sockets are pretty strong, which is why Stygian Vises are so popular. But as you get into higher maps, you'll see things dropping like, for instance, this Vermilion ring, or crystal belts, steel rings, things like that, that have different implicits, usually better than the ones that have dropped before. And so if you see an item drop with a new or different implicit, you might want to double check, is this thing worth something? Because some of the implicits can be quite strong. So the last and one of the most important aspects of an item is of course its affixes or its explicits. So this comprises prefixes and suffixes, and I know when some people hear that they have no idea what's going on. When you have a white item, it has no prefixes or suffixes. You can see there are no stats. If we bump this item up to magic, it now has some stats, and remembering back to the name, we can see it's a barbed ornate ringmail of the worthy, which means its prefix is barbed and its suffix is of the worthy. And if we hold down Alt, you can see it tells us that, prefix and suffix. And a blue item will never have more than 2 mods. So no matter how many times we roll this, we're only ever going to have 1 or 2 mods. But if we bump this item up to rare, suddenly we can have more than 2 mods. Here we have 3, and if we continue to roll it, you can see it's possible to have up to 6 mods. And specifically, you can only ever have 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. So what that means is that there are certain combinations of stats that you can never get. You can never have 4 suffixes. So you could never have 4 resistance mods roll. You would never have cold resist, fire resist, lightning resist, and all resist on a particular piece of gear. It just isn't possible. Now, the reason you might want to pay attention to things like this is because, so here, this item has 3 prefixes and 1 suffix. What that means for us is that if we take this piece of gear and we go to the crafting bench, we aren't able to craft a prefix. It already has 3, remember, but it only has 1 suffix, which means there's space for us to put another resist on it if we want, maybe stats, maybe one of these interesting unveiled mods. For our purposes though, maybe we could put lightning resist on it. So when evaluating a piece of gear, it's important to take into consideration, is there space on the gear for another mod? One last thing to touch on are mirrored and corrupted items. So at the very bottom, you can see here we have in red corrupted, and if we look at an item like this, in the same text as the other affixes, we have the word mirrored, and both of these are pretty similar. They mean that the item can't really be changed ever again. So with mirrored, it's strictly true. You can't really do anything with this. The item is as it is right now. With corrupted, you can't change most of it. You do have the opportunity to re-roll sockets. So for instance, if we wanted to change this 5-link chess piece that's corrupted, we could actually go in and we can change how many sockets or the color of the sockets, although we have to spend quite a lot of vol orbs to do it. With mirrored items, you don't even have that luxury. This item is the way it will be forever. And so one thing to consider is that when you go to buy, or if you're trying to price an item that's corrupted or mirrored, you just want to think, is this item useful the way it looks right now? Because if it's not, it's going to stay that way. Well, I hope all that made sense, and you were able to learn at least a thing or two about items in Path of Exile. If you have any suggestions for other guides or videos you'd like to see get made, leave it in the comments. And if you're finding these videos useful, feel free to subscribe and check out my other content. I'll see you all next time.